Good morning, students. Today we begin a very new section, the history. So, in the previous section, we all studied about geography, right? Geography. In geography, we studied about how our country is situated and what are geographical things that define our country. We began with Himalayas, the formation of Himalayas, and how Himalayas plays a vital role in defining the climate of our country. Then we talked about the um, uh, the rivers that emanate from Himalayas and how they form plains. And from there, we came down to talk about the plateaus, the different plateaus, the Deccan Plateau, um, and then the Central Plateau, and so on, and how these plateaus also make up the Western and Eastern Ghats. Okay, then we studied about the coastal areas of our country, and of course we were supposed to study about the desert, but the given syllabus doesn't allow us. So I mean, you always have enough and more time to know about desert. Okay, right now with that we completed geography. Now we move on to the history. So history, we all know, history talks about something that happened in the past, right? Now usually when we talk about something that happened in the past, it is not that we always want to define people who lived there in the past and then we want to judge them. No, we study past not to judge people who lived there. No, it is not to judge them, but it is to learn from them. That's very, very important. Okay, so we have to know about past. We should know history so that we learn from the past. Okay, whatever good things people were living, we are supposed to inculcate them into our present life. If we find them missing, and what all things that divided them, what all things that really disturbed the peace of the people who lived in the past, and we try not to repeat them again. Okay, so the very first lesson that we are going to see today is very, very interesting lesson, the dawn of the modern culture, the dawn of the modern culture in Europe and India, the early modern age. So we are going to study about the modern age. Now, before we talk about the modern age, you should know three basic important categories by which we divide our history. First one is the ancient period. Antien. Ancient is a very old period. Okay, so I'm not mentioning the year. Now, ancient period, we always say always everything that happened before Christ, BC. We call them as ancient period, roughly. And then we call as medieval period or middle ages, we say middle ages. So Middle Ages are the time frame, the era that happened between the modern age and the ancient age. So Middle Ages always begin from, no, roughly they begin from some years, some centuries after the birth of Christ. So Anno Domini AC, okay, so AD, sorry, AD, right? Now roughly the Middle Ages might begin from 600 to let us say 1300, right? So these are the Middle Ages. Now even in the Middle Ages we divide them accordingly: the early Middle Age, okay, the High Period, and then the later Middle Ages, and so on. Okay, right. Then the third important category, the third important um, era is the modern age. Modern age, right? And then we divide them into then after modern we have contemporary, right? First one is the ancient period, second is the Middle Ages, third one is the modern period, and fourth one is the contemporary. Contemporary. Okay, so that's the contemporary. Now in the ancient period, you might have come across the life of the ancient thinkers, ancient philosophers, people who began to question about the very aspect of living. In the previous class, you would have studied about Socrates and Plato, right? How these people they started thinking. They started thinking about the nature of our being, the nature of our life, and then that thinking pattern slowly evolved into talking about the surroundings that we live in, the nature. Okay, so all that you would have studied in the ancient period in the previous section, probably in class 7 or class 8. Okay, right. In the Middle Ages, mostly these Middle Ages do not concern our Indian academic curriculum, because these Middle Ages have got a lot to do with the Christianity, and therefore the Middle Ages, I will write it clearly. First ancient, and second one is Middle Ages, or we also call it as medieval period, or medieval, medieval period. That's the Middle Ages. Third one is the modern period, modern, 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 and fourth one is a contemporary, okay, PORARY, no space, and therefore I just stopped with RA. Right. Now ancient period, of course, you have just talked about it, and the Middle Ages, medieval period, mostly you would not have heard about this, and this is also called as dark ages in the history of humanity. Okay, in the Middle Ages we find a lot of history about the church, the Christianity. So it is the period in which Christianity became very powerful. No, Christianity became very powerful. It was as powerful as the kings, as powerful as the kingdoms or empires, we could say. Right. So in the Middle Ages, it was Christianity that was ruling almost the whole part of Europe. Okay, right. Now, what happened after the Middle Ages? We also call Middle Ages as a dark period, in which we don't find so much of invention. We don't find so much of the freedom of thinking or freedom of speech was totally negated in this period. People were asked not to open their mouth. People were asked only to speak what is there in the Bible. That's the Middle Ages. So these Middle Ages had their own time. Let us say some 6 to 7 centuries. Okay, the Middle Ages, it was a rule of the Christianity, right, in the Europe. Then what happened after the Middle Ages? We have the modern period. So in this modern period, we find lot of new ideas, creativities emerging, because modern period is just a reaction against the medieval period, the Middle Ages. Okay, so the modern period is a reaction against the Middle Ages. Now, in the modern period, what happened after 1300s? No, the modern period begins from 1600s. Okay, so after 1600s, what happened? People began questioning about the church. People began questioning about the Christianity. Right, so they wanted to bring a division between religion and politics. So that division between the religion and politics took place here in the modern period, and that division actually paved way for many kind of inventions, many kind of discoveries, and so on. Okay, and from modern ages, so we are all here in this contemporary period. We are all here in this contemporary period, right? Okay. Now, in the lesson that we are given today is situated at this point, the modern period. It's not exactly the modern period. So third one is the modern period, right? So it is not exactly the modern period. Just few centuries, just a century, or let us say 2 centuries before the modern period. Okay, so we call it as a dawn. Dawn means beginning. Every morning is a dawn. No. So when the day begins, what happens? Slowly, the darkness goes away. Then slowly the light comes in. Slowly the light comes in, and then it becomes morning. So that we call as dawn, the beginning of a day. So dawn means the dawn of the lesson itself says that 6th lesson. No, for us it is a 5th lesson. So the dawn of the modern culture, the beginning of the modern culture. So dawn means beginning. You should know that. So dawn means beginning. BEGINING, beginning of the modern culture. Right. So this beginning of the modern culture that is roughly situated. Now you could see here the lesson. See here the early modern age. This early modern age is also known as the later medieval period. Later medieval or later Middle Ages. Okay, now you don't have to confuse with the later Middle Ages, but for us, For us, we learn the history of the Europe um in connection with the history of our own country from this point of view, and therefore we'll just call it as early modern age. Okay, so if you happen to go to Europe and study there, and this early modern age will be called as later medieval period. Okay, right. Okay, now we will move on to the lesson, the dawn of the modern culture in Europe and in India. Of course, in the introduction, I just told you about last year what all things you studied. Now, mostly you find the summary here, right? The first one, the country that ruled India before 1947. So you would have studied about the freedom struggle, uh, how the Britishers were colonizing India for almost 3 centuries. Okay, and how we struggled for our freedom. Okay, right. Then you would have studied about what happened in Europe. Okay, so the country whose capital is Paris. No, usually when we study about the colonization, colonialism in our country, we would have studied about the England, a little bit of England, and you would have studied about France, because even French, they had their own colonies in India, and then Portuguese. Okay, so they also had their own colony in India. Okay, right. Now in India, if you go to Pondicherry, you will know what it means. Okay, so the French people were till 1947 they were colonizing India, but one small province called Pondicherry, that is in Tamil Nadu. The same way, these Portuguese, they were colonizing Goa. That is why if you go to Goa, their culture and the culture of the rest of India would be quite different. Okay, because that culture actually was mingled with the Western culture, mostly the Portuguese culture, and in the way of their language, even their food. Okay, so it will be quite different from the rest of India, right? Okay, then. So you better read these 9 points, and you will know. Now we'll move on to the introductory part, that is modern age before and after. The modern age before and after. Historians debate issues like what are the special features of modern age. Usually the historians, they talk about what are different features. Features means in the previous lessons we studied about the different features of the Deccan Plateau, or the different features of Himalayas. Okay, so means everything that we observe. Okay, the important points, feature means we can say important points that define the modern culture, right. Anyway, now we are not going into that detailed analysis of the important features of the modern period, but for us, for our understanding, we will distinguish two main important features of the modern period, that is um, the industrial production and the democratic governments. First one is industrial production. What is industrial production? So here this word seems to be very simple word here, the industrial production. No, industrial, just a minute, INDUSTRIA, industrial productions. Then another important feature is democratic government. Democratic, right? The industrial feature, which means anything that to do with the commerce. Last year in class 8 you would have studied about how the British people came into India. They never came into India with a military activity. No, they never ever colonized India with military, with army. No, they came as ordinary merchant. They came, then they started their own small kind of organization. We call it as East India Company, and slowly that East India Company financially conquered small kingdoms, and they colonized them. That's how they ended up colonizing the whole of the country. Okay, so the industrial production also talks about how these merchants can really change the very whole setup of a politics of a country, right. The second one is democracy. democratic government, right? Just before the modern ages, uh, just before the modern ages, we never had any democratically elected government. So in the next section, under political science, we'll study about the democracy. Okay, but a small introduction about this idea of democracy was actually born only after the modern period. Of course, this idea of democracy was already there, already present in the ancient period when the Romans were ruling. Okay, in the Roman period, in the Roman Empire, there was an idea of democracy, but that idea of democracy is very much limited. But only after the modern period, this idea of democracy became so strong. It was in a way, very thoroughly it was explained, it was brought out. Okay, and now we are living in this democratic period. Okay, so these two things are very, very important. So it is these two important features that define the modern age, that is industrial production and democratic government. Okay, and therefore it's very difficult to pinpoint social very difficult to pinpoint the social changes, social and cultural changes. These two are another two important categories, social and cultural changes. The first one is industrial production, second feature is democratic government, and third one is social changes, and fourth one is the cultural changes. Now here, to talk about, so it's very easy to talk about industrial production and the democratic government as the features of the modern period, but to talk about social and cultural changes, it's quite difficult because it's very vast. We don't have any exact point to talk about the social and cultural changes, right? Now here, one thing that we can observe is that when we talk of social and cultural changes, the important features of the modern period, we can say that this period gave less importance to a person's caste background, right? Everybody is equal. So these social changes talked about equality. Okay, so everyone is equal before the law, though that is equality, right? Everyone is equal uh, before the law. And then the gap between the rich and poor is wider now than it was before. Now what happened? The gap between the rich and poor. So the industrial production, the industrialization also brings who is the boss and who are the subjects, who is the leader and who are the people who are under the leaders, the subjects. Okay, so now what happens? There is a wide gap, means the distance between rich and poor is wider now. And then what happened in earlier times? Religion played a bigger role in people's lives. I told you, just before the modern period, even at the dawn of the modern period, what happened? Religion played a vital role. You would have studied about who, the one who invented the telescope, Galileo. Okay, Galileo, 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 the one who invented the telescope, and the one who said that it is not the one who proposed the idea of heliocentric theory. Heliocentric means sun is the center of the universe and the earth and other planets are revolving around the sun. That's a heliocentric point, heliocentric idea. In the earlier time, the Middle Ages, church heavily depended on the scripture. According to scripture, earth is the center of the universe and all other stars, they revolve around the earth. Galileo said no, it's not the case, and he proved it. And first what happened? He was arrested, and till death he was under the house arrest. Then he never ever contributed to the scientific advancement. Okay, so because of the religious influence of that period. Okay, so we see here in the earlier times, the religion played a bigger role in people's lives. They were more influenced by their religious belief. But today what happened? People have more faith in science and reason. Now that we have grown in such a way that simply we don't really take anything as it is given to us by the religion. We always want to ask the question whether the particular thing that my religion teaches has got any scientific and then reasonable basis. Okay, so we talk about scientific and reason. Okay, we have, of course, we have got our own faith, but that faith should not be blind. That faith should be actually reasonably be brought out. Okay, so today, so people have more faith in science. And in this chapter, of course, we will trace how and when society of the Middle Ages moved into the modern period. So in this chapter, I told you, it's a later medieval period, early modern age. So in Europe, if you study history, their later medieval period and then early modern age, the dawn of the modern period would be similar. Okay, the same thing we find here. So in this chapter, what we are going to see is how and when the society of Middle Ages moved. It's a transition period. The dawn of the modern ages, it is a transition period. So how the Middle Ages, people of the Middle Ages moved into the modern period. The age when this process began is called the early modern era. Okay, now here there are some years you will find. The process of changes in Asia and Europe began sometimes from the 14th century, 1300 CE. CE means common era. No, it was AD. Now it is changed into CE, common era, and continue till 1750 CE. And then we will also study about religion, politics, art, commerce, and trade saw many changes during these 450 years, almost 4.5 centuries. So you see, the transition took period almost 4.5 centuries, 450 years. No, almost four generations. It took 4 generations to find a change from the strict Middle Ages to the free modern age, modern period. Right. More and more people began to live in cities, and they also began to think differently. Usually, when we live together side by side, we always have got enough and more time to talk. Right, there is a discussion. So when there is a discussion, then actually what happens, we find the emergence of new ideas. So usually the cities are the birthplace of new ideas. That is why in history we will always study about the different authors or different writers who actually came from the cities. No, take for example Athens. If we talk of the city of Athens, then naturally we talk of Aristotle. Naturally we talk of Plato, and or we talk of his teacher, Socrates. Or we talk of Rome. Once Rome was the cultural hub of many ideas. Because it is a center, and people go there, people live there, to continue with their livelihood, to live their life. So what happened, and that livelihood changes also brought changes into their own intellectual caliber. So that is why cities are an important hub of new ideas, the birth of new ideas. So many and more people began to live in cities, and they also began to think differently. This modern age laid the ground for Industrial Revolution and French Revolution. So these two things we will study in this history. Okay, so this modern age, it laid the ground, means it started, it became the reason. It became the reason for the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. With developments, what developments took place in Asian countries like India, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey, and the European countries like Italy, Holland, France, and England between 14th to 18th century, that led to the economic and political revolution. So we will also study about how this early modern period had its own play in the Asian countries like Iran, Iraq, India, China, and so on. So changes were many, but we shall discuss only the cultural and religious and intellectual changes. So the changes was actually many. but for our knowledge, we will talk only about cultural changes, we will talk about the religious changes, and we will talk about the intellectual changes. Okay, right. Now another important thing that you should understand when we talk about the modern period is three important processes. So we say change took place for almost 450 years. We saw in the previous part, no, almost 450, it took 450 years for the change to take place from the middle ages to the modern period. So we are talking about now, we are going to learn about this change, how this change took place. This change took place through three important processes. The change took place through three important processes. That is the process we see here. The first one between 14th to 18th century. So they are called the Renaissance. The first important change, you should know that this is very, very important. The first important change that took place, the first process of change was the Renaissance. Okay, so Renaissance is not an English word, it's not an original English word, it is a French word for rebirth. Renaître, Naitr. So it's a French word for the Renaissance. No, Renaître means rebirth. Okay, right. Second important change that you first one is Renaissance. Second important process of change is Reformation. Once again, rearrange, reformation. This Renaissance happened in arts, okay, art and culture, but Reformation takes place in religion. Mostly it takes place in Christianity. The Reformation took place in Christianity, right? The third important thing is Enlightenment. So Enlightenment, we talk of Enlightenment in the context of scientific revolution, means there are discoveries. So it is the change took place through these three different processes. Once again, I tell you, the first process is a Renaissance. Okay, Renaissance in terms of art and culture. So we say, no, art means anything that that we see, and we experience, that is art. Now it could be anything, no, a picture or an architecture, a building, or it could be even a movie, or it could be even a drawing. Okay, so anything that that is given to our senses, that we call as art. And second one, Reformation. I told you Reformation is in terms of religion. So religion, mostly these changes took place in Christianity. And third important process of the change was Enlightenment. So Enlightenment marks different discoveries. So it is under this Enlightenment we will study about many scientists who came out with different discoveries. Okay, right. So it is these three process that actually define the changes. Now these movements are associated with European history, but similar development took place in Asian countries during this period. Now usually these three processes, the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment, these processes they took place in the European history, but at the same time we also find their effects, we also find their influences even in our own country too. So in India also it happened. So in India, how this Reformation took place, it took place through the Bhakti and Sufi movements. Okay, so the Reformation in Western Europe, it took place in the Christianity. Okay, but here in India, the Reformation took place through Bhakti and Sufi movements. Okay, and the new awakening art in India, the Renaissance took place in the form of new awakening in art. Right. So in the same way, we can go on speaking about the influence of these three processes of change in India, in China. Okay, so we can go on speak about it. Okay, right. So with that we complete the introduction to the chapter, and now we will move on to the very important section under this chapter, the different facets of change. We will see that in the next part.